Chapter 37. Messenger of the Royal Family. I will not scream. It is in front of me. Surely it can tell what it has done. To her. To me. To all of us. This is not the first time. He has done this before. It has done this before. To the courageous. To mate. The oracle dipped down into memory, and Zelda remembered a life that was not her own, her body suspended in the air above a throne, the soothing dreams she floated through while the twilight carried her soul for safekeeping and her body was put to deadly purpose. Not to her. Not to Paya. I will not stand for this. The amnesiac and the princess and the oracle were roaring inside of her. Hylia herself was trembling with the indescribable emotions of a god, humming beneath the surface of Zelda's skin. That trembling told in Zelda's hand as it clenched into a fist. Molten light poured out from between her fingers. Sought release. Sought purchase. Hylia, who loved her, was smiling with Ganon's expression. With Ganon's eyes. If I do not speak, I am going to collapse. If I do not fight this, I am going to go mad. I can't. Oh, Hylia, forgive me. I'm so sorry for bringing you here. Please, please. No. No, she would not give in to despair. The power was in her, bolstering up the parts of her mind that wanted desperately to break down. If she hadn't had Hylia inside of her, would she have fallen? Would she have wailed, and begged for Paya's return, and given up on the spot? She didn't know. Certainly, it was possible. But the possibility could not be borne out in a reality where the light was hers. That light would not let her buckle. It let her speak, in clipped words that filled the hall. Put her back. Ganon's eyes shone and the grin grew wider. Again, the Gerudo warriors looked over their shoulders. Bada and Kata and Lena looked to Liana for guidance, and the sergeant's eyes flitted back and forth between Zelda's face and the back of Paya's head. Whatever was happening, the sergeant didn't understand, and Zelda only had room in her mind to acknowledge this fact. She couldn't rectify it. She had to focus on Ganon. Let her go. Hey, Liana said, her voice quiet in the maelstrom. She ran the risk of turning her attention fully from the Yiga, facing the two small women. If you two are up and ready, we have to. She reached out with her hand. Ganon's eyes darted toward Liana's direction. The smile did not drop away. Zelda saw what would happen perfectly. Don't touch it. If Liana had reached another inch closer, Ganon would have grabbed hold of her and... Well, but at Zelda's scream the god recoiled, practically leaping backward to fall in line with the rest of her squad, and Ganon's eyes returned to Zelda, and spoke, in a voice that was not Paya's. The Calamity had not spoken the tongue of the Gerudo in 10,000 years. It must have been a remarkably preserved language, because the phonemes had apparently changed very little in that span of time. The grammar and structure were badly out of date. However, Ganon used conjunctive particles that no longer existed, and missed entirely contemporary ones that would have lent clear meaning to its sentences. Translated imperfectly and coarsely, its words might have gone something like this. Hie away, sisters mine, ere new gods blind and old reclaim. The reaction among the four women was instant, so they could see the shift in them, but only as it happened. They all whirled on the speaker, turning their weapons toward Paya's back. The Yiga were forgotten. The enemy was in front of them. Ganon, Liana called. Ancient enemy of the people. Be gone from this place. Stop! Zelda's shout shook the fortress to its foundations, sending torrents of dust falling from the ceiling. Unbelievably, the Gerudo ignored her, focusing instead on the embodiment of their ancestral shame. Just run. I will tend to this. Ganon's smile fell away, for a moment, as his eyes grew wider and wilder. Wherefore art thou faithless, thou hateful, to draw steel against thy brother, thy uncle, thy king, thy god? Zelda moved with a god speed to interpose herself between Ganon and the four women. She could see Ganon turning slowly toward the Gerudo, though its eyes were locked on her as it did so, as if it were waiting for her to get into position. It didn't need to turn, of course. It didn't need to raise its hand. These were only theatrics, meant to add drama to the fact of what it was doing. She threw up a wall of Hylia's power as Ganon's strength flowed to smash the four gods. Something inside of her began to break. The pressure drove her down to one knee. This was all the strength she had used to defend against Koga, so much that she barely recalled the experience of having done so, easily as much and more than she had used in bringing down the blights, and now she was matched. The balance was nearly perfect. Is Ganon not leveling all of its strength? Would I even be able to tell? Then the pressure was gone as Ganon ceased its assault, and Zelda dropped the wall of Hylia's power, and her physical senses reasserted themselves. The Gerudo, thankfully, had drawn back, though a distance might not be a protection here. She nearly swayed on her feet but would not allow herself to. Ganon still had its eyes locked with hers.
Stop using her face,
Zelda said, and she could not name the thing she felt then.
It out. Are you so concerned for this girl?
Ganon's Hylian was considerably more practiced, more comfortable, than its Gerudo.
Has the icon of the goddess finally heard some echo of the love this child has for her?
She pushed the words out, away, did not let them sink their hooks into the flesh of her mind. Floundered, reached for anything to anchor herself.
Why are you doing this? To hurt you?
The smile remained. The teeth were still decidedly pious, there were no fangs. The lips moved normally. Ganon seemed to relish in the fact of having a body.
There are thousands of ways to hurt you, of course. You're ever the child of your blood. Still, this girl seemed perfect, because she loves you.
A twitch in the eyebrows, a shifting of one corner of the mouth, and the smile became something else.
The bearer of your power is always so moved by the love of others. Always.
Zelda was no longer trying to hide her shaking. Trying to frame that monstrousness was more than she could allow herself. The idea of an ancient evil that sought to rule the world, to change the landscape into its own image, to yoke the cosmos, that image was easy to compartmentalize, if not understand. But this petty cruelty, to inflict so much harm on someone because of the truth in their heart. The image of it sat in her mind like a burning coal clenched in her fist, boiling away her flesh even as she couldn't let go. He is hurting her to hurt me. He is hurting her because she loves me. It is hurting her.
Where are you?
Pyatt had never smiled the way Ganon made her face smile. She had never laughed the way it made her laugh, long and low and deep, a rumbling that rattled the teeth in a listener's head. It did not answer. Zelda breathed into her nose, gathered herself, focused on the power, focused on Paya.
You are not here, not in your fullness. If you were, I would not have been able to stop your attack just now. Your control of her body is remote. You are transmitting your will and your strength, but you are not here.
The laughter faded, the smile leaned closer to a sneer as Ganon tilted Paya's head.
Clever child, aren't you? There haven't been many as clever as you. You are not really here, and Paya is gone. I suspect that she is with you, as that is the only way you could keep her secure. So, where are you?
Ganon did not answer. Instead, he stepped toward her. Something inside of her rebelled as seeing it walk. That gait was Paya's gait, that posture was Paya's posture, and seeing Ganon walk in her body made Zelda want to hide her face and pretend it wasn't there.
There have been those of your blood who would see this as an opportunity to bargain,
Ganon said.
To leverage what I want in such a way that might afford them advantage in the future. Your house's women have always been such cunning creatures. But that isn't you, is it?
Ganon stopped directly in front of her, looking at her with a demon's eye set in Paya's face, and Zelda could feel the heat from Paya's skin. The two of them had never been this close, not once, not ever, and there was a scream building up inside of her that was drowning out the goddess herself.
You are more concerned with truth, with rightness, with fairness, with doing good even more than triumph.
Ganon leaned in close, whispering with Paya's lips against Zelda's ear.
Would you believe that I admire that about you? Stop it,
she said, and she could barely understand the words from her own mouth. Ganon stood straight again, though Zelda still felt Paya's lips against her ear.
I wonder if that's something that I'm getting from the girl. Does it seem likely, to you? You are the researcher, after all. You are the goddess. You've seen her soul, too. Tell me, is that me? Or her?
Stop it. And the words were nearly strangled.
Maybe I should tell you the things she feels for you as I hold her in my hand.
Pai's eyes fell contemplatively closed, and with that terrible light hidden it was possible to believe that Pai was standing there. Until Gannon continued speaking.
You know her, yes, but right now, I think I know her best. She holds to such a delicate balance, controlling what she feels for you so that she might help you better. Her devotion is so pure, so intense.
Stop. The eyes opened, blazing.
It reminds me of his.
The world froze, shattered, fell away to nothing. There were no Yiga, no Gerudo. The fortress was gone, the desert was gone, Hyrule was gone. There was no war, no quest, no anything. The goddess was silent. Only she and Ganon existed, and the calamity continued.
So strong, that one. Unbelievably so. No one has ever fought me like he has fought me. And every day, every hour, for a century, he has fought with your name in his heart. It is not the sword that lets him fight me. It is not the blessing of the absent gods. Not the protection of the forest. Not the honor or duty of his legacy. It is you. Only you.
It echoed inside of her. Paya and Link, suffering, for her. Distantly she realized that Ganon was attacking her now, directly attacking her thoughts. That made it no easier to defend against. She felt no less cool, no less drained, knowing that this was not just her reaction. The glow of Ganon's eyes did not counteract the resting calm of Pai's expression as the beast stared at her.
100 years passes no more quickly for me than it does for one of you. Every day I am faced with his devotion. Every day you are the sun in his heart. Every day I am cut open to honor his duty to you. Is it any wonder that some part of that should find purchase in me, too? That I should find myself changed? That when I took the girl to my breast, that she would resonate too? That with the enormity of their hearts, I would be able to understand what it is that they feel for you? What I should wish to tell you?
Pai's hand came up, rested on Zelda's cheek. She couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't breathe.
My Zelda.
It was a relief, an indescribable relief on a scale she had never imagined before in her life, when Ganon struck her. Her awareness snapped back into place as the force of the blow sent her flying, not toppling but flying, her body lifted off the ground and pinwheeling through the air to smash into the far wall. The stone broke. There was more empty air beyond it. Then another wall. Then more air. A third wall. A fourth. The fifth broke her momentum, and she slumped to the ground. The shock of the impact ran up Pai's arm, her shoulder, all the way to her spine. She felt it as if she'd hit Zelda herself.
Death?
The things Ganon had been saying, those things she'd been able to block out, had been able to push away. Zelda knew that Paya loved her. That wasn't the weapon, but Ganon was trying to make it into one. Power flowed from it as it spoke using her mouth, and she saw as its strength smashed itself against the fortress of Zelda's mind over and over. Zelda was going to break. She had to do something. She had to do something. All of that while she poured into her hand. How many times had she failed to hurt the calamity? It didn't matter. She would fail over and over, would fail forever, because she could not do nothing.
Every time you strike me,
the calamity said, and its voice shook the cosmos,
I will strike her like I did just now.
It turned its eyes down toward her.
She can heal much, but believe me when I tell you there are limits. Fight me, if you wish, but if you do then I will make you experience the act of beating your beloved princess to death.
The calamity's words faded. Across unspeakable distance she heard the second nebula of malice roaring, heard the distant crash of thunder. Pai pulled her second arm free, sharpened both hands into blades, focused her will, drove them both as hard as she could against the calamity. It crushed her in its grip, and everything was pain, pain indescribable, pain incalculable, and she struck at its hand, over and over and over. She was the pain was everything. She took the pain and threw it back at Ganon, emptying out a sinking ship with a bucket, spitting in the ocean's face, and she struck over and over and over again. There was not space in her mind to think with words, but these things she knew, that if Ganon had been able to kill Zelda using her body, it would have done so just now. That whatever its final purpose, it depended on some trap. That though she could not succeed, she had to fight. That she had to protect Zelda. That was all that mattered. She struck, knowing that she could not win, knowing it would be the last thing she ever did. Lying on the floor, Zelda was given a few moments to reflect on the ways she had nearly failed, up to now. The ways she had taken lives that depended on her and nearly let them be spent to no end. How she had come into the world for a second time, as if reborn, and found that she was still a child trying to find her way in a world walked by gods. One of those gods was inside of her. That counted for a lot. With Hylia's power, she drew the architecture of her mind. She had to be prepared for what was to come. The world was teetering in the balance. But that isn't new. It's teetered in the balance every time a bokoblin has laid eyes on me. As she shored her defenses, armored herself in light, and infused herself with the very limits of her power. She had called on all of it, but of course she wasn't capable of wielding all of it yet. If she could, she would be in the heart of the castle, fighting Ganon, all the divine beasts having been freed, rescuing Paya, rescuing Link. So, no, she could not hold all of it. But all of it that she could hold, she did. Zelda rose to her feet. She filled the air, the fortress, with her power and her awareness. Ganon still stood in Paya's body, an infinitely dense space of yawning hunger that gave off no radiation, no malice, as it stood waiting for her return. The Yiga had spread throughout the chamber, watching from every angle, impassive as corpses. The Gerudo, for all their courage and all that their weapons were still drawn on the calamity, did not approach. Id. 4 less people to worry about. She stepped lightly over the rubble from the destroyed walls on her short trip back into the chamber. Ganon was waiting for her with a hungry, eager expression.
Restore Paya to her body,
Zelda said.
If you want the little fool so badly,
Ganon said,
come and get her yourself.
Ganon blinked once, and then was gone. Paya's eyes were clear again, sclera white and irises round and red, and empty of light and of will as her body began to slant forward. Zelda understood, from the intersection of her experiences and the wisdom of the goddess, what Ganon was doing. She had time to reflect, as she rushed to catch Paya's body before it fell. The wise thing would be to gather my strength, to take the Thunder Helm to Riju, to free Urbosa and then Rivali. Finish gathering my memory. Take all of my power into the battle with Ganon, and with all of Hylia's strength and the hero beside me, to rescue Pyre and the world. Ganon believes I will not do that. Paya suffers every moment, perhaps less terribly than Link, very possibly more so. I would consign her to weeks of unspeakable pain. I do not know if it is possible to permanently wound a soul, but if anything can do it, then Ganon can. Perhaps she will be utterly destroyed in the interim. All of which is to say, Ganon believes correctly. She caught Paya's body before it toppled, hooking her arms under Paya's, lowering both of them gently to the ground. She kept one arm behind Paya's back to keep her body upright, and for all the world it looked like Paya was sleeping sitting up. Her expression was so serene, free of worry or pain. It was a foolish thing to plunge into that dark space that souls occupied, where she had first spoken to the goddess at the very beginning of her new life. It was foolish to cast her infinite gaze about that parallel world, to see the vastness of the calamity, to meet its eyes, to see that it held Paya in its fist. Then I will be the fool. The amnesiac, and the princess, and the oracle were of one mind. Hylia's sword will be unsheathed. The goddess herself did not gainsay Zelda. There was a unity of purpose, nearly so sweet as victory. She soared across the darkness, a golden comet lighting the universe, propelled by the beating of mighty wings. Paya had lost count of how many times her hand had bounced off of Ganon. She had long ago stopped being able to count, so terrible was the pain of its grip. She kept going. She would keep going until she was freed, or she was destroyed. After interminable time the pressure slackened, and the pain abated. That did not stop her. She would not be stopped. But still, even as she kept swinging, even as she felt the shocks running up her arms, she looked to follow the arc of Ganon's eyes. She had to see. So, she saw. She saw the distant light of Hylia's power, framed by feathers pulling Zelda across the ether. She heard the distant chime of the goddess's arrival. She knew, on a level more fundamental than the act of learning, that Zelda was coming for her.
Are you calm now?
Ganon's voice was amused.
I did not think you would call my bluff so enthusiastically. I have been watching you try to free yourself. But that is over. You see her there. You see how quickly she comes.
Zelda was coming quickly. She was made vast by the power of the goddess, more resplendent than the physical world could ever hope to contain, and the space of that realm was melting away before her. As Paya watched, she could see Zelda folding the light between her hands, manipulating it until it started to take shape. Until it was a point. Until it was a lance. Zelda held that lance before her as the distance dwindled, and Ganon barely restrained its laughter.
As time has gone on, it has been a more and more common thing for the blood of the goddess to join the battle against me. In the old days, the oracles would always participate indirectly, through my machinations or through theirs, but for a long time they have been much more active. She is the only one who has ever come to me on her own.
Paya was no longer striking Ganon. She was trying to process what she was seeing.
Why? Why would she?
For you, of course. It let that hang in the ether for a long moment.
I told her that if she wanted you then she would have to take you from my grip. You were truly perfect bait. I feel I should thank you.
There was something building inside of her, a pressure that started from a place she could not identify. Not caring if it was useless, not caring if it was foolish, she screamed into the expanse.
Zelda, stop. You can't do this.
No. Ganon agreed.
You could feel it, can you? She is a match for my pawns, but as we are now she will be nothing to me directly. Still, she comes. See her spear? She will attempt to strike hard and deep, enough so to break my grip, then snatch you away and retreat. She knows she cannot defeat me, and yet she comes on anyway. She doesn't know how to fight, so instead she will try to win.
Obscenely, the Calamity sounded fascinated. It would have been easy to retreat to the place that Paya had occupied before, that sweet shelter of ignorance that allowed her to believe that Zelda's power was supreme in all the world. She could not do so. She had seen, was seeing, the Calamity for herself, understood that even at the zenith of the princess's power and the nadir of the beasts, Zelda would not be able to defeat Ganon. Not really. If she tries to save me, she will lose, and the world will be lost. She willed her hand into a blade. It wouldn't sharpen. I can't. Was this the Calamity? Was it affecting her as it had affected Zelda? She looked up. Ganon's eyes were cast out into the void, waiting with preternatural eagerness for the arrival of its true prey. No. I'm feeling this for myself. I can't give up like this. What will trying do? Shall I break Ganon's grip in the moments to pass? I have to do something. I have to protect Zelda. I cannot protect her. I have doomed her. That thought. Was it hers? Was that from inside of her? The pressure built, straining the very seams of her being. Her grandmother was in Kakariko village now, waiting in perfect faith that Zelda's quest would reach fruition, that Paya would aid Zelda on the long road to joining the hero in battle, that light would triumph over dark, that, in the end, all would be well. Everyone in the village took their tone from Impa, and each of them had faith in Zelda. Prince Sidon did, too. So did King Dorephan. All of the Zora, young and old, even that hateful old counselor and the retired sergeant, were waiting on them to do what had to be done. Ludo and Yunobo and all the Gorons, Riju and Bully Era and Lena and Leona and Barta and Kata and the names kept coming, in their 2s and 10s and 100s, names and faces that she did not know she had committed to memory, cascading past her in endless waves of lives that were balancing on Zelda's quest. Lives that she had betrayed, because she loved Zelda, and that was a weakness for both of them. If I had left her, if I hadn't felt this thing, if we had never met. Every face, every life, swirled around her, in her, through her, coalescing into a single, perfect expression, Zelda, in the distance, charging to her doom to save a woman who should not be with her at all. When the world ends, it will be because I failed it. The pressure reached its apex. Something rose inside of her, not bile because she had no body but something worse, more malignant, more corrosive, and as it boiled over she began to writhe. The Calamity's grip had been nothing like this. Nothing had ever been anything like this. "I've killed her. I've killed us all." She had an image in her mind of what it would be like when Zelda slammed into Ganon, and the Calamity grabbed hold of her. It had the unnerving clarity of prophecy. She saw golden wings torn free by enormous hands. Ganon's hands. My hands. The thing inside of her built up until there was nowhere else for it to go, and she screamed. Her body could have never made a sound like it, a sound that rang across the boundless void, a sound that would have made the heavens quake. An infinite distance away, Zelda staggered at the pain of Pai's wail, redoubling her speed. Much closer, Ganon turned its inquisitive gaze on her once again. After a long time, she stopped. The sound faded. She was emptied out, with nothing left of her. There was not even an echo, there was nothing to cast the echo back. The cry of her heart was lost to shadow. Only silence answered her. Silence. And then thunder. Hylia's sword was not the blade in her hand. It never had been. Space warped at the thunder's crash, and in the distance there was a howl of pain and fury so intense that it drew Pai's attention away from herself, away from the coming doom of the world. She felt nothing, but she looked so distracted that she did not notice when the Calamity staggered. The second Calamity, the second enormity of evil so vast that it was a universe unto itself, was exploding, shining through with white light from uncountable angles. As Paia watched, it was torn apart, flinging its malice and hate and rage into the vastness as a bolt of lightning danced in the space where it had been, leaping between the greater pieces of that other Ganon, blasting them to finer and finer smithereens. Then the lightning peeled off from the maelstrom, streaking across that infinite space toward Paia, toward the beast that held her. The Calamity was turning to face it. Too slow. Thunder roared as the lightning struck at Ganon's ankles, and the tendons there exploded with twin crashes unleashed power, spewing malice and fire into the void. The bolt coursed up Ganon's leg, cutting behind the knees, tracing a line of devastation up the torso and then along the left arm, cutting through the armpit, the inner elbow, running down the forearm. The lightning was not lightning, Paia realized. It was a ribbon of light, cutting apart the darkness. And it was held by a man. Ganon's hand was gone, and she was falling. An arm was around her, thin but strong, bracing her weight beneath her hips. She hit the ground. There was no ground here, but she was lowered gently onto some solid surface, and then the figure holding the lightning turned to face Ganon again. Grandmother had told stories about the hero, but because she was not that sort of storyteller, she'd never really said what he had looked like. Paia had some image in mind of him, because she had been given the space to build that image on her own, but what she saw then was not his body. She, with the eyes of the soul, could only see the warrior as he truly was. Link was brilliant, more than brilliant, like all the stars in the sky condensed into the frame of a single man. His soul was blue, burning bright to match Ganon's darkness, and that blue was broken up by flashes of red and green and cyan, the same colors as the fires that roared and danced inside the sword that was held together only by the delicate latticework of Hylia's power. The sword was like an extension of him, intensifying that radiance that let him cut through the darkness. Ganon's severed hand hit the firmament of a place Paia could not see. The Calamity howled its fury as it turned on the hero, collapsing onto its knees. But instead of moving into attack, the blazing figure looked over his shoulder at Paia. "Impa, what are you doing here?" His tone was not accusatory, he was genuinely bewildered, trying to fit what he was seeing into his experience. "Where's Zelda?" "He thinks I am my grandmother. He thinks I'm in my own body. He really doesn't remember. He doesn't." Some echo of an indescribable pain welled up inside of her, radiated from Link, colored by his devotion, and in that moment Paia understood why Mipha and Zelda had wept for this man. She would not weep. Instead she answered, "The princess is recovering her strength." Link's shoulders sank as tension passed out of him, as relief nearly brought him to the ground. "Good. That's good." Then he was back, the sword lifted again. Ganon's soul no longer held to the shape of a body. It was a roaring inferno with great golden eyes, staring down at Link, high forgotten. It howled a challenge. Link said to her,
"Can you escape?"
Paya looked over her shoulder. Zelda filled the entire horizon.
"Yes."
Link craned his neck to look up as the calamity grew. The other nebula, rent asunder by the Master Sword, was rejoining its mass to this body.
"Don't go back to Zelda. Help her recover. I will hold Ganon until your return."
He doesn't see her. Is he only seeing with the eyes of his body? Is he not allowing himself to see?
"I will,"
she said. She looked up at the calamity, which also no longer seemed to be aware of anything except for its century-long opponent. The hero looked so small before Ganon's evil as she found her admiration and her disbelief warring inside of her.
"Can you do this? Tell me the truth."
Instantly,
"I will not fail."
Something inside of Paya shifted. A golden hand wrapped around her, radiant and warm and gentle, conferring absolute safety in a universe that would deny her the security. Paya, by sheer force of will, anchored herself in place. Ganon roared, and it was the sound that would end the world.
"We'll come back for you, Link. I promise we'll come back."
He did not answer. He did not look back at her. He raised his left hand, fingers loose, gesturing his confidence.
"Link?"
She did not know if that voice was hers or Zelda's. The universe was drowned out by the sound of mighty wings. The calamity, perhaps, sensed that its prey had drawn near to it and then escaped. Perhaps it didn't. The hero's interruption had dragged it insistently back into the realm of the physical, offering no space for it to carry out its plans. Possibly it did not reflect on this, more likely it did, and that fed its rage. That rage, though, amounted to precious little, with the Master Sword singing obliteration in Link's hand. The calamity writhed like a serpent on the ground, and Link attacked it from every angle, chopping and severing wherever possible. They were twin blurs of motion, light and dark, one much greater and one much more precise than the other. The sword's power filled the chamber with an unending series of deafening roars. Ganon shoved, and Link avoided it by leaping away. Ganon's body was already dissembling, and it could barely push itself up into a position where it could stare at its enemy.
"You fool,"
the calamity said.
"You don't even know when you're beaten."
Link crossed the distance between them faster than Ganon could react. The Master Sword sang a high, clear note as it clove through Ganon's jaw and then cut a path upward. Ganon's head exploded. It pulled back a limb, which coalesced into a fist, and swung for Link. The sword met it, and that too exploded into a torrent of malice. The sword flashed, over and over, like lightning striking in a storm. Ganon fell, dissolving into fire and hate. Both bodies destroyed, the malice that had comprised them began to flow together. No different from countless other times it had fallen, now. Link staggered away from the center of the mass, finding a good vantage point from which to observe his enemy's recovery. He fell to his knee, held himself up with the sword, trembled. He could not recall. Had he been talking to Impa just now? Had she been here? Had he been dreaming? Zelda will be here soon, he told himself. He believed. He waited for Ganon to rise again. She did not think of Link, of how close he had been. A part of her screamed that she had to return, to join the fight, to end Ganon then and there. But another part of her knew, insisted, that there were snares within snares and that she would be walking into another trap. She brushed the hero from her mind. Paya was here. She had to help Paya. The sensation of Zelda's body came back to her in stages, the damp coolness of the air in the Yiga fortress on her skin, the ringing echo of Hylia's power in her ears, the shining radiance of the goddess's presence fading even as her eyes adjusted, the smell of sweat and blood and malice and pain, and the weight of Paya leaning against her arm. She shifted, resting the other woman's head against her shoulder.
"Paya,"
she said, coming to herself fully. She had held Paya, had come back to this place, had thought she had done it correctly, but the moment stretched out and she wasn't sure and the fear rose up in her again.
"Paya."
A stirring, a breath, a surprised one. The silver-haired girl going momentarily rigid, and then relaxing.
You came for me,
Paya said, in her own voice, small, weak, thin, as if speaking from a dream, but her own. She did not lift her head from Zelda's shoulder. Zelda reached up with her right hand, resting it against the base of Paya's neck. Paya was on the edge of losing consciousness, and Zelda would not let her fall.
Of course, I did. Of course.
Paya sighed, and then all the strength went out of her as she fainted. Zelda lowered her onto her back carefully, slowly, so there would be no injury sustained. The princess went over her attendant with her eyes and her fingertips, checking her breathing, checking everything she could. Because Paya was all right. She had to stay all right.
Kit?
Leona's voice cut through the air, through everything. Zelda looked up, saw her surroundings for the first time in minutes. The full Gerudo had formed a very loose perimeter around her, weapons ready. Beyond them were the Yiga, nearly cloaked in shadow, masks throwing light so that they were like desperately arranged teeth floating in the dark. Zelda did not know how many there were. They seemed to fade in and out of the shadows as she stared at them. There was a heavy sound of many dozens of weapons being drawn simultaneously. Whatever had arrested the Yiga before now, whatever it was that had held them back, that influence was gone.
All four of you get close to me,
Zelda said. Varda moved back almost before the words were out of her mouth, resting one hand on Zelda's shoulder.
Either lay a hand on me directly or lay one on each other.
The Yiga pressed in closer, so close that Zelda could see the blue light of her armor reflected in their polished masks. Zelda took the Sheikah slate in her hands, keyed in a command, with a delay. Returned the slate to her hip. The Amnesiac princess put one arm behind Paya's back, and the other beneath her thighs, and lifted her from the ground. She rose, as the four Gerudo guards pressed in. Leona and Kata still had their weapons trained on the advancing, silent horde, which gave no impression stronger than that of a mouthful of teeth slowly biting shut. The fortress shook, the earth heaving underneath their feet. Zelda nearly grabbed the power to determine what could have caused such a thing, but the roar that followed the shaking, the sound of an explosive rage bellowing from a chest the size of a nation, made it obvious. Zelda looked out to the Yiga, who had hesitated at the shaking, at the sound. She said to them,
"All of you who can run, do so. Your master will not discriminate."
The slate activated. A blue light engulfed the 6 women. They dissolved into strings of radiance, and then they were gone, spirited away from that place of shadow and seal. End of chapter.